there, and welcome to the Spiral Lab. Hi, my name is Marta. I realized that I never introduced myself at the beginning of these live streams. I guess I just sort of assumed that everybody who is watching them already knows me, but maybe I should stop assuming that. Maybe there are some new folks here. If you are watching this live, I would love to have you introduce yourself in the comments. Say hi. Especially if you're new, I'd love to know a little bit about you and what brought you here. And as always, if you're watching this as a recorded video after the fact, I'd love to have you like the video if in fact you do like it. Leave some comments about yourself, about your reflections on what I'm talking about. And of course, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you know when new videos are coming out. Those are ways that you can help any YouTuber whose channel and whose content you really appreciate. Those are just great ways to support a YouTuber and their channel. So anyway, just looking to see if there are any comments. There's some nice thumbs up in the chat box, but no comments yet. Oh, I guess a couple of a couple of little logistical things. It's really warm here in Philadelphia, here in the middle of April already. That happens sometimes, so that's not necessarily so unusual. But it's actually great weather for having the windows open. But unfortunately, there's like dramatic construction happening on my already quite noisy street. So I thought I was going to be able to have the window open, and then the beep, beep, beep started again. So if I look a little warm or start perspiring, that's the reason, is that we don't have air conditioners in yet. The ceiling fan is too loud, can't open the windows. I really shouldn't complain. It's a beautiful day, but I am kind of done with the noise outside. So the topic for today is slowing down to get things done. And oh, hi Lydia, nice to see you. Great to see you. I never quite believe that anybody's here. And Spiral Nerd, two of my favorite folks from Divergent Design Studios, our online community. I never quite believe that I'm actually talking to anybody until I see some comments in the chat box. So thank you, Lydia and Bug. I appreciate that. Yeah, this is a topic that's really near. Oh, and here's Mad Doll. Hi, what a lovely flower. Oh, thank you. There's a great story about this bouquet of flowers, which is that I was recently walking to my local coffee shop to get some pastry, and I walked past a building that has been sort of derelict and dilapidated, but which I've always loved. It's a really beautiful old building, and I've always thought, oh my God, if we're going to have a brick and mortar shop, that's the building, or an art studio or something like that. That's the building I'd love to have it in. And then recently I noticed that they were fixing it up, and I was happy. I figured somebody was going to do something with it. And then this last time I was walking by, I saw that it was a flower shop right here in my own neighborhood, which is really exciting. And so then I went online to see, and they have this, like, you can subscribe to get a bouquet of flowers delivered to your door every Monday afternoon. And I was like, of course I want to do that. So this was my first bouquet of flowers from my local flower shop. So it's just like, it feels like win-win. I get flowers, I'm supporting a local business, and it's in this building that I just love. But anyway, thank you. I appreciate that. So there should be like nice flowers now as a feature of the live stream, assuming they last from Monday to Thursday, but these have done quite nicely. Anyway, slowing down to get things done. So this is a topic that is near and dear to me. I really believe in it, but I like all things. I don't think it's simple. I guess I should warn you that there aren't like, there's never quick and easy solutions to any of our problems. And this one is certainly included. But I do think that the principle of it is fairly simple. And I think that it's something that, that once you get it, you can start trying to incorporate it into your life. I also want to say, I'm seeing that there's some more comments coming in. As usual, what I'm going to do is just try to ignore them for a little while. And then when I come to a natural break, I'll go back and look at all the comments, because it's just really hard for me to keep my train of thought if I'm also paying attention to the comments So anyway, don't feel like I'm ignoring you if I don't respond to your comment right away, okay? I love them. I love, love, love getting comments. And in fact, you should continuously be commenting anything that comes to your mind. I'd love to hear it. I'll get to it shortly. So what I was saying about, the sort of caveat that I should say right now is that I don't personally believe that we should always be trying to get things done. Like, I don't think that being productive, being accomplished in that sort of way is necessarily the end of life, like the be all and end all of life. And it may not be your goal in life to accomplish things and get things done. And that's fine. And in fact, I think in some ways, letting go of those expectations is a good thing, and is also part of this process. But that said, I do think that often we do want to get things done. There are some things that we hope to accomplish in our lives, and I think that is something that many of us as neurodivergent people struggle with. And so I want to talk about why I think counterintuitively the best way, the most efficient way, if you will, to actually get things done, if that's something that you're trying to do, is to slow down. And it is really counterintuitive, but I really think that it works for a couple of reasons. I think that a common trait of neurodivergent people, and I think that this is especially true of ADHD people, but I don't really believe in any of those really like tight, neat diagnostic labels. So I generally just talk about neurodivergent people. I think that a common trait of ours is that we have lots of stuff going on in our minds all the time, right? Like, let me know if that resonates for you, that our minds are just moving really fast often. We're making connections, we're thinking about new ideas, we get excited about stuff, and our minds are just busy, busy, busy. We have lots of ideas for new projects, and we go down rabbit holes and learn new things, and then we want to try them out. So there's all this stuff going on, all of this sort of internal momentum to do stuff and to get stuff done. And our instinct is to try to match that on the outside by rushing. So I think that instinct to rush is actually the wrong one, but it makes sense, right? Because what we're trying to do on the outside is to match what it feels like on the inside for ourselves. And I personally think that like a lot of the sort of so-called executive dysfunction problems of neurodivergence often come from that rushing. So like losing things, forgetting things, misplacing things, like not closing cabinet doors and leaving without your keys, or misplacing things, putting them down without realizing where you put them down. Like, I think a lot of that actually stems from the fact that we're like almost always rushing, or at least feel like we ought to be rushing. So our mind never settles on the moment. Like, our mind rarely settles on the moment when we put our phone down, or we're rushing out the door and we don't pause to think through, do we have our keys? Do we have our wallet? So I'm not like I think that some of those kinds of executive dysfunction things actually come from the rushing, which I think is a natural, a totally intuitive impulse to match what's going on in the inside to what's going on in the outside. And then I think there's another piece of this as well, which is about our relationship to time, which I talk a lot about. I think I even have a couple of videos about spiral time, and I have an ebook, which I'll put links to these things in the description below after the live stream. So if you're watching this later as a recording, you can find those links. But I do have an ebook that's called, I think, Neuroemergent time, making time make sense for ADHD and autistic people, that is about this idea that I and others now have really sort of developed about something we call spiral time. But in general, I think, and a lot of neurodivergent people agree with me, that we often have a different relationship to time than many neurotypical people do, and that we get a lot of grief for that, because a very, very specific construct of time that is very linear and industrial is sort of the norm in our society now. And so our ways of being in time, which are more fluid and spirally and meandering, don't really fit in, right, to this very linear industrial model of time. So I think because of that mismatch, because we experience time in a really different way than we're supposed to, according to society, because of that mismatch, we have a lot of anxiety and issues around our relationship to time. And I think that as a result of that mismatch, and as a result of our anxieties and shame around that mismatch, I think that we're not very good judges of our own productivity in time. So I think that when we look forward into the future, we often underestimate how long things will take us. So, we'll make a to-do list of, the things that we hope to do in a day. And then we may cross a few of the things off, but all we can see are all the things that were left undone. And we feel like, oh, we haven't been productive, right? And then I think the same thing is true when we look back. I think we often underestimate how much we've actually accomplished in a given period of time. And I think that is exacerbated by the fact that that we're often looking at these really small increments of time. My experience is that if you expand the amount of time that you're looking back at, you'll feel much more accomplished. So like often if I just look at what did I get done yesterday, or what did I get done in the last 3 days, it often doesn't feel like much. But if I say, what did I get done in the last 3 months or the last year, suddenly I have a more expansive view of it. And sometimes it's like kind of amazing what I've accomplished. But if you ask me in any given moment, looking back, are you being productive? Are you getting things done? I misjudge it. So, and I think that both of those things, the looking forward and misjudging how long things are going to take, and looking back and misjudging how much we've accomplished, and I think that those are just really common experiences for neurodivergent people, which put us in this difficult, in a like sort of difficult relationship with our own productivity and our own sense of our capacity to get things done, right? And I think that a lot of the reason for this, like why we need to look back at longer stretches of time, is in order to see what we've actually accomplished, is because the ways that we accomplish things are often not really incremental. They're not like step by step, by plotting step in a really linear kind of way. They're often sort of non-linear and meandering and kind of hard to pin down in any moment. But they do eventually coalesce into something meaningful and kind of impressive often. But I think we often don't look back long enough because we're trained to think in really short increments of time. Like we're trained to think in 8-hour days and 5-day weeks, and and sometimes it just doesn't work that way for us. So I think that on account of all of these sort of experiences of mismatch and of misjudgment and self-judgment, we end up having a lot of shame around our sense of our capacity to accomplish things and to get things done. And so our response to that is often then to try to work harder and faster and in a more linear way, right? Like we double down on all of the things that already aren't working, rather than trying to disrupt some of that shame and accept ourselves and accept our way of being in the world and look at things in a more expansive way. Instead, what we do is we like try to put blinders on, and we try to put our head, nose to the grindstone, head down, and, more and faster, hustle, hustle, hustle. And then that just backfires. So again, these are just some of sort of my theories about why it is that we rush, and why I think that it doesn't really work for us, even though it seems like it ought to, right? So I'm going to pause here for a second and look at some of the comments, because it looks like there's lots of cool ones. All right, let's see. Lydia says, such a beautiful bouquet. Sounds like an amazing subscription. Yeah, if you're just joining us, there's that bouquet that I'm going to get a new one every Monday afternoon. I'm really excited, from a local florist. Thank you, Lydia. I'm really pleased with it as well. Jenny says, hi, Marta. Slowing down. What a timely topic for me. Watching from bed with COVID. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, Jenny. Not bad until now, luckily. Yes, well, I don't mean to be laughing at you at all. I'm sorry that sometimes what I do apparently inappropriately, but what I mean to say is that, like, that really sucks that you have COVID, but I'm really glad actually that you're in bed and slowing down, because that's exactly what you should be doing. And I hope you feel better much faster, much sooner, very soon. Gosh, I can't even talk anymore. I'm going to take a sip of water. I don't know if you guys can hear, like, there's sirens and horns, and I hope that you guys can't hear. Like, usually the microphone keeps the audio mostly focused on my voice, but it's a little distracting to me. There's just so much going on outside. Lydia says, I feel this. I tend to make more small mistakes, miss details when I feel overwhelmed and busy. Right. And I'm going to, I think that you're talking about the sort of examples that I gave of, like, how executive dysfunction actually increases when we rush, and that, and I'm not completely convinced that rushing is necessarily a trait of neurodivergence. I think that the rush in our minds is a trait of neurodivergence. I think that trying to keep up with that rush in our minds by rushing on the outside, rushing through our lives and rushing through our days and, like, literally physically rushing, I'm not sure that that's a trait of neurodivergence. I think that that's like a sort of misguided attempt to cope, to keep up. And it's an intuitive one, but I think that ultimately it doesn't work. But I do think that, I have noticed that the more I slow down, the less I misplace things, the more able I am to sort of remember to close the cabinets in the kitchen after I'm done making my lunch and those kinds of things, right? Let's see. Mad Doll says, I identify with the rushing thing so much. It makes me quick and efficient and has helped in various jobs, but it can also make you look frazzled and unhinged. Yeah. I do think that there are times when rushing, that actually brings up a great point, Mad Doll, because I do think that there are times when rushing is the appropriate response for us. I think that we do really well in situations of urgency, like true urgency. We're really often very good in emergencies, where, under pressure, under deadline. Like, sometimes I think that we procrastinate precisely to put ourselves into those positions because we do work well under pressure like that. And when there's true urgency pushing the rush, when when the urgency, the need to rush comes from the outside, I think that rushing actually can be really adaptive and appropriate and useful. Although I do think that Mad Doll is right that it can also leave us looking and feeling frazzled and unhinged. But I don't think that it necessarily backfires in those situations so much as what I'm talking about, which is a little bit different. I'm talking about when the urgency is not real, when the urgency is not when the urgency is simply because we have this sense that there's so much going on inside us that we should match that with like a sort of rushing sensibility in our lives and in our bodies and through time. And I think that is intuitive, but it doesn't actually work. And I think that often the reason for it is because we feel so much shame about our sense that we're not productive enough, that we haven't accomplished enough. Anyway, so, but I do think that that's a really good point, that it sometimes, that the rushing sometimes can be really effective. Lydia says, I go through periods of time when it feels like my brain is whirring with a bunch of different to-dos or thoughts in the back of my head. It's during those times I find myself struggling. Right. Yes. I mean, I have that a lot where I want to do something and like my brain is like, okay, well, do this. And then it's like, no, do that. And which should you do first and how to prioritize which one is more important. And my impulse then is to do something and do it really fast, right? Almost like I'm running out of time. But yeah, I think that that's a really common thing with that sort of like busy feeling in our brains. The list of to-dos, and it can be sort of like to-dos that are imposed on us like through our work or our family obligations, but it can also be like what we want to do. You know, like that often happens to me. Like I'll start thinking about like, in fact, this just happened to me this morning. I was like, I really want to get back to making some art. I think I'm gonna start doing some sketches. I've made a portrait of my son, and I really want to make a portrait of my daughter. So I'm going to start doing some sketches of my daughter, and maybe work towards painting a portrait of her. And then I started watching some art videos by this artist I really like who does abstract work. And as I'm watching her, I'm like, oh, maybe I should do some abstract painting instead. And then I'm like going back and forth. And instead of spending any time doing any actual art, I'm like having this tug of war in my brain about whether I should start sketching images of my daughter in preparation for a portrait, or whether I should start get my paints out and start making some abstract paintings. And in neither case do I choose, but my impulse in the past, I think, would have been to start something and do it fast so that you can get to the next one. Like start sketching madly pictures of my daughter and then like slap some paint onto a portrait so that I can get to the other pieces of other things that I want to do. And then none of it goes well, right? And then I end up abandoning the projects, blah, 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 blah. You know the drill, right? Monica says, hello, I'm late, but excited to be here in real time. So nice to have you here in real time, Monica. Regarding expanding the length of time you look back to judge productivity, I think that kind of expansion will also inherently change the nature of the judgment, or that is the quality of the judgment. Going from things checked off a list to bigger things like shifts in mindset, growth in mental health, growth of relationships, etc. Monica, that's such a great point. And I couldn't agree with you more that often we think of getting things done as these like really concrete things. Even when we're, like I was just talking about, even when we're talking about like making art or something, we think of it as a painting, right? Getting a painting done, or a sketch, or filling a sketchbook. But I think that often the work that we're doing, and part of the reason that ticking those things off our lists, even the things that we want to do, like making art. I think that sometimes the reason that that's hard in any given period of time is because we're doing other stuff that is much less tangible, but also so very important, right? Like resting, like, yeah, like the things that you were saying, shifts in mindset, growth in mental health, growth of relationships. Those are real, but they are so intangible in the moment that it's often hard to see that, oh, wow, you know, I, one of the things I can look back on is say, I used to be so reactive. Like I used to be so sensitive to rejection. I used to get really angry and reactive and defensive about X, Y, and Z. And I can take a breath now and put a little distance between me and what just happened and be much less like that. But that's something that happened so incrementally over such a long period of time that I couldn't really see it as it was happening, right? But that's like some of the best and most important work that I've done in my life, and one of the biggest accomplishments in my life, frankly. So you can't just, I guess I'm just simply agreeing with Monica, who put it so perfectly, that you just can't discount what the work is that you're accomplishing. But it's true that some things lend themselves much more to a long view, for sure. Which is another one of the reasons that I often talk about how, like, this is one of the things that's kind of fun about growing older as a neurodivergent person. And I personally think is like really the only advantage of age. I don't think that old people are wiser than young people. I don't think that old people, like, whatever. But I think that old people do have a vantage, not an advantage, but just a different vantage. They just have more to look back on. So there is some amount of wisdom that comes from that vantage. But we can all incorporate that in our lives by simply trying to look back with less sort of self-deprecating judgment, for sure. I skipped over a couple of things, though. Lydia's agreeing with Mad Doll. She says, my efficiency is a fine line that can dip into seeming unhinged. I think that we can probably all really feel that, right? Robin says, something that can help me with feeling better about what I've accomplished in a day is to not just look at what was checked off the to-do list, but to note things that I did that weren't on the list, and even other energy depleting factors, always trying to get a better understanding of what my capacity really is and how long things really take. Yeah, absolutely, Robin. I couldn't agree more. I actually often put things on my list just in order to cross it off. But those, again, are those tangible things. It's the intangibles that are just kind of hard to put on a list and cross off. Like I didn't reduce reactivity in my life in any given day. Like there wasn't a day when I could cross like, oh yeah, I'm less reactive today. I'm less reactive, right, than I was yesterday. And Lydia says, yes, there's lots of internal urgency that isn't actually always necessary. Yeah, I think that's what I'm getting at. I think that the internal speed, like I love that about myself. Like I love that in myself, in a given moment, I want to both make a portrait of my daughter and start practicing abstract art. Like I love that those things are interesting to me, and that I feel an impulse to do both of them, and that at the same time I'm like watching this abstract artist videos and having ideas about like the multimedia lab at Divergent Design Studios, like all these things that are happening and connections that I'm making, right? Like that I love. What I don't love is when that kind of speed and there is even a little bit of an urgency translates into I must do it all right now, right? Like that kind of urgency, the urgency to manifest it, the urgency to do it, to accomplish it, to finish it, to check it off a list. That's the urgency that I think isn't useful, and that it sort of intuitively feels like what we should do in response to the busyness inside us, but counterintuitively, I think the exact opposite is true. And that's a great lead into what I want to talk about next, which is if our impulse, often based in our shame and our sense and our misdiagnosis of how much we are accomplishing, looking forward and looking back, if our impulse in the face of all of that is to move faster and try to accomplish more and to put our nose to the grindstone and get more linear and hustle harder, if that's the impulse, I think that instead, at least this is what's been true for me, instead, I think that we want to, instead of matching our internal speed with our external, or instead of matching how we're moving in the world on the outside to how our interior life is moving, how fast our interior life is moving, I think that we want to try to think of them as complements, right? To in fact slow down our exterior motion, speed, urgency, busyness, to complement that interior speed, busyness, urgency. And I was taking some notes before the live stream, and a couple of images came to me that are helpful to me. They just came to me just like a couple of hours ago, and I don't know if they'll be useful to you, but what I think it's partly because I've been thinking about art, and especially this abstract artist who I really love, whose channel is great. She talks a lot about color and color theory and complementary colors. And so I was starting to think about, like, if our insides are yellow, right, which is a really hot, warm color, then to try to think of what we need to do on the outside to sort of complement that busyness as lavender, like the ways that we should move in the world and try to accomplish some of the things that are in our minds. Try to think of that as lavender, which I think of as a much cooler, calmer, less busy color, right? And then I started thinking about, like, if the inside is red, think of the outside as like sort of seafoam green. If the inside is bright orange, think of the outside and how we're going to be in the world, the kind of calm that we're going to try to cultivate in our movement through time and through space as kind of sky blue. Another image that came to me when I was thinking this through, because I really do think that metaphors can be helpful when trying to explain these kinds of intangible and abstract experiences. Another thought that I had was that I think that often what we feel like is that we're trying to climb a mountain and we're not doing it fast enough and we're not making enough headway to get to the top of the mountain. And I do think that, like I said at the beginning, sometimes I think we should interrogate whether or not we should be trying to climb mountains, or at least all of the mountains. Like, I think that's like another discussion, but an important one. But to the extent that this is a mountain that you actually want to climb and isn't a mountain that has been imposed on you, by the world, if your impulse is just to climb straighter and harder, that's probably not going to get you to the top as fast as if you do switchbacks, right? Like the solution is the switchback, not push harder straight up. So that is what has been really useful to me, is to think of not matching the speed. I think the speed inside of us, the fullness, the richness of everything that's going on inside of us. I think of that as a strength. I think of that as one of the wonderful aspects of neurodivergence. The constant connections that we're making in our minds and the speed of them, the creative impulses that we have, the passions, the special interests, the desires to do this, that, and the other thing. I love that about myself. I love that about all of you. I know that it can sometimes feel like a burden, but I think that this is the reason that it feels like a burden, is because we then think, oh, I have to match that now in my actual life. And sometimes I think that we get burnt out, that we melt down, that we shut down, that we get fatigued so fast because like we feel like we're supposed to accomplish all of everything that's inside of us. And we just can't. Like it would be impossible to, right? And I think that, I mean, I don't want to disparage neurotypical people, and I have no idea by definition what it feels like to be a neurotypical person. But the sense that I have gotten from some of the neurotypical people that have been in kind of close relationship in my life is that often anyway, and again, I don't like to make gross generalizations, and honestly, I don't even really believe that there is such a thing as neurotypical. I think that is kind of a construct that is used to oppress everybody as well. But to the extent that there are people who are like decidedly not neurodivergent, sometimes I think there's just not a whole lot going on in there. And so when they judge, when you feel like, and so they're accomplishing all this stuff. They're accomplishing all the stuff that's in them. It would just be impossible for us to do that. I just really think that by definition, it would be impossible for us to do that. So, so just to sum up so far, I think that the way to the best, to the extent that you do want to realize, actualize, manifest some of the things that are inside of you into objects of art or scholarship or ideas in the world or relationships or businesses or whatever it is, home decor, whatever it is that you want to accomplish on the outside, to the extent that you want to do that, counterintuitively, the way to do it is to complement, not match what is going on inside on the outside. One of the moments that this became really clear to me, and I always wish that I could remember who gave me this idea. Who it was in a comment on an Instagram post, and I don't know that I could ever find it again. But it was just this beautiful image when I was talking about this on Instagram once. And this person said the way that she thinks about it is that is to think about like a fine craftsperson, an artisan, like a carpenter or somebody who works with really fine and beautiful materials and crafts them into beautiful things, and the sort of slowness and the precision that is required to do that. It was just a really beautiful image that has stuck with me, and I think especially because my own father, who is who's many things, he has many accomplishments and special interests, and almost certainly is neurodivergent, is among many things a really fine carpenter and woodworker. And it's true that when he's working, he gets like in a zone, and he's very like his hands move slowly. He takes a step back. He watches, the old adage that you should measure twice and cut once. Like it's really true. Like there's just a kind of slowness that comes that's sort of required of the kind of work that he does. That just really resonated for me. And I think that that is something to emulate. And I actually do that sometimes when I feel this sort of racing inside of myself. I will literally, physically slow myself down. So like I hang my laundry to dry. And if I'm feeling like that racy kind of anxious urgency in my head, there's so much going on. Should I make a portrait of my daughter? Should I, like all this stuff in my head going on? Like the answer is to take one clothespin off the line, put one sock up, clip it with the clothespin, take my hands down, walk back to the washer, take one more piece of clothing out, walk back to the line. Like to just do it really slowly and methodically is really helpful. And I think that basically what we're talking about here is sort of like getting into a meditative space in response to the busyness inside of us. So I'm going to get back to my notes because I'm meandering, as is my wont. I think that it's easy to say that this is what one should do. This is the solution, is to slow down on, to slow your movements through time and space down to complement the busyness inside of you. But then the question is how to do that, right? Like it's nice to say that, but it's a whole other thing to figure out how to actually do that in your life. So if you've been following me for any amount of time, it will come as no surprise that what I'm going to tell you is that there is no simple solution to this. There's no simple answer. There's no just do this. We were talking about this in a peer support group or something. I can't remember where, but in Divergent Design Studios, in one of our Zoom calls, we were joking about if you ever hear the word just when somebody tells you a solution to a neurodivergent problem, just run the other way because clearly they don't understand. Like, just make a list, just set an alarm, just, like it's never as simple. Like if it were that simple, then it wouldn't be a problem, right? So the answer isn't to just slow down. It's not as simple as that, obviously. There's like no 5 easy steps to slow down and get things done. And you will see people hawking these solutions, like I recently saw some video that was about the 2-second rule. And there is this woman whose name I'm always forgetting, and she does have ADHD. I think of her as a little bit of a huckster, but I haven't really read her work very much. But she's like made millions of dollars on something called the 5-second rule, which is just count to 5. I mean, I'm sorry, but if it were just that simple, we wouldn't be here, right? We wouldn't be struggling. We wouldn't have a problem. So I think that the solution to the problem, as it often is meta. The solution to the problem of slowing down to get things done is to accept that this is going to be really slow, right? That it's going to be, the solution is also going to be slow. And that if you feel impatient, right? Like if you feel impatient with that, I totally get it. I think that many of us, especially if we have spent a lifetime feeling like we're not getting done what we need to get done or even what we want to get done, I think that we often want to jump on simple answers. We want to jump on like surefire 3 easy steps, the 5-second rule, and then all of our problems are going to be solved. But I don't think that I think that the reason that we're all here is because those quick solutions haven't worked. And we know, and we do know from experience, even if we don't know it intuitively, that rushing isn't helping. Like the more we rush, I don't think the evidence is there to suggest that we're actually accomplishing more, or at least not in any sort of like satisfying, meaningful, physically or mentally healthy way, right? So I want to suggest that if what you want to do, as I'm suggesting, is slow down to get things done, if you want to try to build this into your life, this kind of principle of slowing down to get things done, then I think that you're going to have to accept that it is not, there isn't actually a solution. This is a practice, right? This is going to be a practice that you're going to adopt throughout your life, and that it will be cumulative. It will grow. It will expand. It will get better to the extent that like we're putting judgments on it. But it is a practice, and I would say, and this whole topic was really sparked by an amazing peer support group that we had Tuesday in Divergent Design Studios, where we were talking about kind of the quotidian aspects of life, like the quotidian necessities of life, taking care of our physical spaces, feeding ourselves and our families, getting things done, right? But on that really basic level of, sweeping occasionally and doing the dishes sometimes and cooking food and getting the laundry done and taking care of our hygiene, like those kinds of things. And we talked about it not just in terms of being a practice or a contemplative practice, but it's also like a contemplative meditative practice. And it can even be, and I think that if you're into this, if you're open to this kind of framing, I think it can be a spiritual practice. The taking care of the mundane, the taking care of the daily, can be very much experienced as a spiritual practice. And I think that if we can get into that frame of mind, that will help us get started with trying to internalize the external slowness that we need to complement the internal busyness of our life, of ourselves, of our neurodivergent selves. In my experience, okay, I'm actually going to stop there, and I'll finish. I do have about half a page of notes that I want to finish about how sort of how this has played out in my own life, and maybe that will be helpful to some of you. But first I'm going to take a sip of water, and then I'm going to read the comments because there's a bunch of great stuff going on, I think. Let's see. I have to figure out. Lydia says, I agree, and I think that this was in response to when I was talking about how I really love my internal life. I love the richness of my interior life. And Lydia says, I agree. I love my energy and my momentum. I've never considered differentiating the inner and the outer speeds. This is a helpful reframe. I'm glad to hear that. And Spiral Nerd says, ooh, I love the color imagery. I'm re-bleaching my hair and doing a purple conditioner while I listen. So balancing warm yellow tones with cool purple tones is exactly what I'm thinking about right now. Oh my gosh, I love that so much, Bug. I love that from your comment, I read that as saying you're literally doing it while I'm talking, and that just makes me so wildly happy. Yeah, I think that, different images, different metaphors will work for different people, but for those of us who are really tuned into color, that just really came to me, that like my interior feels hot. It feels yellow and red and orange, and my exterior. And if you look at my home, it's interesting that I surround myself with greens and blues and turquoises. And to the extent that there's like warm tones, they're really like tamped down, like light pinks and that kind of stuff. Ketsia says, my goal is to be able to talk about oppressive systems with equanimity like this without sounding bitter. Oh, Ketsia, I feel that so deeply, so deeply. And I think that it is a brave and valiant goal for sure. And I do think that it's entirely possible for you to do that. I think that like it's a complicated thing because I think that our anger and our rage is is often warranted and justified and sometimes even needed. But I think that for me anyway, what has been useful is figuring out how to not be reactive from a place of trauma inside myself, right? So that when I am angry and demanding and insistent, it is coming from a more kind of expressive and even didactic place and not necessarily from a traumatic place. But yes, I think that trying to learn how to slow down to create a little space for yourself. Somebody recently, some video that I was watching um, was describing this process of like having an experience and then expressing your reaction to that experience. Like when you realize that it's possible for there to be a little space between the two of those things, that can be such an aha moment. Like it doesn't have to be an immediate reaction. Like there can be a little bit of a space, like a breath in between. And I think that that's a little bit of what I'm talking about, is creating that sort of spaciousness and that slowness to, well, I'm talking about it in terms of in relation to our interior selves, but if your interior self is feeling things and having ideas about oppressive systems, then yeah, slowing down in the expression of how you respond to that can be, regardless of whether it's good for the world. I just think it can be good for us, right? Like I think it also makes us more effective communicators and more effective activists. But in the first instance, I think it's good to do that just because it's better for us. It feels better. We feel better. We just feel less traumatized, right? So anyway, thank you for that comment. That's really beautiful. And I think you're on exactly the right path, Katya. Andrew says, my inner world is massive, but the door to get it out is tiny. Personally, I'll take that over the opposite. Andrew, that is another great way to frame this. Right. So that's actually, I'd never thought of that before. But that kind of fits what I'm talking about, is that I think that what happens is that we have this enormous interior world and we have this very small door to get it out into the world. And so we rush, right? We push hard and we get all crammed up there. We get this bottleneck that happens. We get all twisted and contorted and squeezed. And that then what comes out when it does get out is kind of distorted and not what was inside of us. So that's actually a fantastic metaphor for this experience. Thank you for that. I think that really, really gets at what I'm talking about for sure. And I also, Andrew, agree that I would rather have too much inside of me and a too small door than the opposite, right? That having not enough inside of me or not very much at all inside of me and a great big wide open door. Like personally, like I said at the beginning, I like my interior self. I like all the stuff that's going on inside of me. I wish sometimes that it was easier to get it through the door, but I would much rather this than the other way around for sure. Monica says, regarding neurotypical people and not a whole lot going on there in their minds, I agree. And I think it might be a difference between what they are conscious of versus what we, neurodivergent people, are conscious of. That's interesting. A friend describes this as underground neurodivergent versus above ground neurotypical thinkers. I find this helps my relationships with neurotypicals enormously. I need them and they need me. Oh, that's interesting. I like that. Yeah. And Lydia also says, oh, Monica, such a helpful way to think of it. Thank you. I agree. Lydia goes on to say, this is an ongoing convo between me and my spouse, and I don't understand his quiet mind. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that I mean, this is going a little far afield, but I think that difference between the neurotypical mind and the neurodivergent mind, there isn't an intrinsic conflict in it, but I think that sometimes there can be tensions, and then if there are power imbalances in addition to those tensions, especially when the neurotypical person is the person with more power than the neurodivergent one, that can like lead to really bad results, I think. I think that one of the things that I have felt in my life in the past is that neurotypical people really gravitated to me. They were really attracted to me and wanted to have access to me because it, like, my very being felt kind of like heightened and intense in a way that they kind of wanted to have access to, but not too much, like sort of on their own terms. And then the flip side of it was that, you know, there were ways that I was weird and annoying, and and they wanted to sort of not need to, and disabled, right, and needy, and they wanted not to have to deal with that stuff. So I do think that like that again, it's not an intrinsic mismatch. Like I think that neurotypical and neurodivergent people, I'm sure, can very much be in healthy, effective relationships. But I think that there has to be at least a sense of awareness of the give and take, and there has to also be, as with any relationship, really, like when the power dynamic is not good, that can often lead to not good things, right? Andrew says, I'm learning that if I can make something a mission and therefore interesting, it goes a long way to help me complete mundane tasks. Yeah, I agree. In fact, I've been thinking about doing something about gamification because I think it gets such a bad rap, but I'm really kind of into it. Like, I find that if I can gamify something, it's much easier for me to get it done, especially the mundane stuff. Monica agrees with me that Andrew's tiny door image feels so accurate. Let's see. Ketsia says, I'm not sure exactly what Lydia said that you're responding to, but Ketsia said, I read a quote that describes me. I may be boring, but I am never bored. Yeah, I like that. Katsia says, I would love a whole workshop on this. This might be a cool project to even bring into DDS. I'm always eager to bring stuff into DDS. Let me know a little bit more about what you're talking, what specifically, Katsia, you're referring to. And finally, Vatsalya says, hi, I found your account recently and it honestly has been so helpful and comforting. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to hear that, Vatsalya, and I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for popping in and leaving a comment. I really appreciate that. All right, that's the end of the comments for now. Please keep them coming if you want, and I always make sure that I get through all of them before I sign off. But I do just want to finish up quickly what I was sort of the sort of how, right? There's the what, there's the why, and then there's the how to actually do this in our lives. And I don't have there isn't an answer. There isn't any simple answer for sure, but I can tell you from my own experience what has been helpful to me. And that has been starting with something that you really enjoy, right? That you're unlikely to put off and unlikely to want to rush through because it's something that you love and that brings you pleasure. So it might be like reading genre fiction with a cup of coffee in the morning, which is something that I do. It might be giving yourself half an hour to play your favorite video game over lunch while you're eating your sandwich, right? It might be going for a walk. It might be doing a puzzle. It might be watching Netflix at the end of the day. Like, it doesn't have to be something that's like that's productive or meaningful or valuable or anything like that. But I think if you can find something that that you enjoy, and that you're unlikely to rush through, then you can start building on that. Like you can, like, so for example, and I talk about this all the time. People who know me probably are so sick of this story, but I start my day with toast and coffee, and I clean up my kitchen from the night before while I'm making my toast and coffee. And I've for so long have thought of cleaning the kitchen as this onerous task that, that just like, it's something that I avoid, that I want to rush through, that I want to get over with, or that I just don't want to do, that I feel lots of shame about when it doesn't get done. But in fact, if I let go of some of that shame, and do it in the context of something that's really pleasant, and at a time of day, I happen to be an early morning person. That's like the time when my bandwidth is at its largest. So it's actually kind of a lovely thing to make order out of chaos, and to load the dishwasher and do the pots and pans and wipe down the counters while the kettle is boiling and the toast is going. Like it doesn't actually take that long if I do it every day, and it's really deeply satisfying. Like I can sort of turn it into this contemplative practice that's just part of my morning routine. But the only reason that I even started doing it was because it's more pleasant to have a clean kitchen when I go to eat my toast and coffee than it is to not have a clean kitchen. And it's more pleasant to make my toast and coffee when the kitchen is clean. So that's just like one sort of really simple example. But I think that the key is to start with something that's pleasant. If you can, like if you have access to pleasure and that doesn't like bring up bad stuff for you. And then I think the really key part is just to start noticing your inclination to rush, to start noticing where the shame pops up. Yeah, and I think that the same thing, like start with things that are pleasant, but also things that you have to do. Like look at chores. Is there a way to reframe those as contemplation, as meditation, as even spiritual practice? But first, just start noticing like what is popping up when you're doing something that you have to do. I think that the practice, the ongoing practice, is the noticing. And it may be that you something that I've started doing that I got from this a video on an account that I really like on YouTube called Struthless. He was talking about micro journaling in the Notes app on his phone, and I've started doing that as well. Like rather than thinking that journaling has to be like this time that I sit down and write like long passages, I can just just type a couple of sentences at a time, or even just a couple of words to remind myself as I notice how I'm feeling and what's coming up for me. So I think that once you start noticing, then you can take steps to kind of deliberately slow yourself down, like I was talking about the hanging the laundry slowly, or taking my time with wiping the counters, or whatever. Once you start to notice, then you can start implementing the slowing down, the contemplative practices, the meditative aspects of this. But first you have to notice. You have to notice the inclination to rush, the impulse to rush. Yeah, I think that, okay, so great. Monica says, the ongoing practice is the noticing. Such a fantastic takeaway. Yeah, I think that that's it. That, like, I had never really articulated this for myself, but I do actually think that in almost all things, like disrupting shame, like the first step is always noticing. And so once you get into a practice of noticing, of awareness, which is really just this is really just like, this is ancient wisdom. This is not Marta's wisdom. This is ancient wisdom of being mindful, of mindfulness, right? Like it's rooted deeply in lots of philosophies and religions, of like, be here now, pay attention, stop rushing to to the future or to the past, but just be in the moment and notice. That's the practice. And again, that's ancient wisdom. It is hardly anything that, anything new that I have invented, but it is something that I have fairly successfully implemented in my life. And I think that that's the key. That's the key to all the healing for me, has been starting with the noticing. And then I can start, like, it's impossible to have compassion for yourself, or care for yourself if you don't even notice that you need it, right? So yeah, the ongoing practice is the noticing, for sure. Penguin Drum says, big fan of Struthless's videos. His systems are so in the spirit of design thinking. I agree. Sometimes I look at his channel and I'm like, damn, he got there first. But there's always lots of space, and his channel isn't specifically about neurodivergence at all, but much more about creativity, but also about healing, and he does. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised at all if if it turns out that he's neurodivergent. I know that he has struggled with substance abuse in the past, and I think that there's connections there as well. But he's an artist, and he writes a lot. He makes videos a lot about issues that face artists that are often the same sorts of issues that face neurodivergent people. And so and he's also Australian and has this lovely Australian accent. And he's just a really, really nice guy. And I think his wife is going to have a baby soon. And anyway, I highly recommend his channel. It's been super successful, for sure. All right. Well, I every time that I do one of these live streams, I think, do I have enough to fill up an hour? And then, of course, I go on for like an hour and a half. But this time we are just now at 6 minutes after the top of the hour, and that feels like a pretty good time to stop unless anybody has anything else. Thank you all so much for being here. And again, if you're watching this as a recording and you've made it this far, please do leave some comments below. I just love to see what resonates for people, what comes up for people, what people are thinking. Like the video, that's really helpful. Subscribe to the channel, that's super helpful. And go watch some more videos. There's lots of other videos that I've made. Soon, my friend and YouTube partner Jessie Meadows and I are going to be putting out some video essays. We're both working in our own sort of spirally slow way on some video essays, which will be, pre-recorded from the start and like more produced and more edited. And I'm really excited about that. As so we're sort of walking our talk here. It's taking longer than we thought, but we're just like going with it. But I hope that you'll be on the lookout for that. And as always, if you're interested in Divergent Design Studios, come check us out. We'd love to have you. All right. Thank you all so much, and I will see you soon. All right. Bye.